Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Gut Thyroid Connection webinar. Excuse me. We're back again for another great event. And I know this topic is near and dear to a lot of your hearts, including my own. So believe me when I say I'm just as excited for all the amazing tidbits of knowledge we can take away from today. And also, as a reminder, after the event, you are going to receive an email and it's going to have a promo code for $25 off your next one-time order with Paleo on the Go. We're also going to have some other goodies in that email too, which I'm super excited about. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it off to our lovely panelists, Lindsey Day and Dr. Zakaria. So can you guys tell us a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely. And for any of you who have attended these webinars before, you probably recognize me. I think as we were talking about before everyone joined, I think this is the 5th one. So I love doing these because it is my passion to share this information with anyone struggling with their health, because as was mentioned by Lauren, this is also a topic that's very near and dear to my heart because I struggled with hypothyroidism for years and had the back and forth with doctors where it went undiagnosed. And it took me leaving my last career, which I was a meteorologist and I worked for various TV stations around the country. It was an amazing job. I loved it. There was nothing wrong with the job other than the fact that I was very sick and I could not continue to wake up at 2 a.m. to do that job. I had to get myself healthy. And so I made the decision, in order to get myself healthy, I needed to sleep like a normal person and pay a little bit more attention to my health, reduce the stress load. And that's why I decided to go back to school to study nutrition with an emphasis on functional medicine and then pay it forward to others. So I wanted to get myself healthy, to pay it forward. And I love teaching and knowledge. I really believe knowledge is power, and I geek out on this stuff. So I'm very excited to be here. And I'm very excited to introduce my former professor, Dr. Zakaria, or Lara. And she gave so much insight, and she actually taught a lot of the business side of the nutrition field. And so not only does she have like this expert knowledge on the science behind things, but she also understands, all aspects of this. And her background is very diverse. So I'm not gonna steal her thunder. I'm gonna let her share a little bit about her background, and then we're gonna dive in and give y'all some information.
Thank you so much, Lindsey. And first of all, this is my first time here at Paleo on the Go. So I have had such a warm welcome. You guys have been so kind and so organized, and this has been just right off the bat really fun. So I am excited for this conversation. So yes, thank you for the warm welcome. My name is Dr. Lara Zakaria. I'm an integrative pharmacist and a nutritionist. So my background started out in pharmacy, and I slowly transitioned my way into functional medicine. Eventually, I got my master's in nutrition, and that's how I ended up teaching nutrition and nutritional biochemistry. And yeah, I do teach a module on business implementation, particularly because in order for us to be able to get this message out, webinars like this, really knowing who to follow on social media and how to distinguish what is good science from what is bad science is one of my passions. And I also studied public health and specifically communication for nutrition. So this is such an amazing platform and such an amazing opportunity to get really solid information and education when it comes to nutritional science. So that said, this is why I'm super excited about this particular opportunity to talk about, I think, a nuance when it comes to thyroid health, which is that connection between the gut and the thyroid. So thank you so much for having me. So I'm going to just jump right in and give a little bit. Yeah, I'll go ahead. Yeah, I will. I'm going to go ahead and start with kind of laying the groundwork and telling a little bit of the story of the thyroid and why I think it has been a little underappreciated in the way that we look at thyroid disease right now. So first and foremost, I want it to be clear that thyroid herself is a hormone and she is a diva. That thyroid hormone wants what she wants when she needs it, and she does not want to have any conversations any other way. Anything that alters the delicate balance that is our hormone symphony is going to impact the way that thyroid hormone acts. And this is really critical because thyroid is also sometimes called the master metabolic hormone, because behind all our metabolism, essentially the machinery that's running in the background, that's keeping us alive, that's making sure that we're doing everything from breathing to thinking to our daily chores, our daily activities, answering emails, all of that requires metabolism. That's essentially the production of energy. That's a very complicated process. Life itself is dependent on this complex process. And thyroid, she is at the top of it. She is making sure that all those things are operating at the highest level possible. That also means that when she's not feeling well, when things are not working at their optimal level, it's not going to be as effective. And she's going to start prioritizing in terms of what's most important. Making sure your heart rate is running, making sure your brain is running, making sure we're breathing, and all the basic functions are happening on the back end. That is non-negotiable. It's going to make sure your thyroid is going to make sure that all those things continue running. And that's why we start to see some of what I call superficial symptoms, but I don't think they're very superficial, start to show up when that thyroid starts to drop. So that's when you start seeing hair loss, or even just like your hair texture starts to change, starts to get a little bit drier, starts to get harder for it to grow in. You start seeing changes in skin texture. It's a little duller. It's not as shiny and robust. Or you start to see changes in your nails, right? They become more brittle. They're harder to grow. And as soon as they start to grow, they're thin and they crack right off. All of those things are superficial because they're like, well, you know, it's just the way that I look. It's not necessarily as important. But there are these kind of low-hanging fruit that the thyroid can avoid and get rid of right now, because it needs to reprioritize and take all the resources that she has available to make sure that all the important stuff is continuing to run the way it's supposed to. On kind of like the broader end of things, you start to see like more serious symptoms start to show up. You start to see things like brain fog, sensitivity to cold temperature, cold all the time. You sort of, everybody else is warm and comfortable and you're feeling a little chilly. You start to experience constipation or slow bowel movements. That starts to change. Again, that's because your digestive tract relies on the same energetic pathway. All of these symptoms are associated with hypothyroidism, are essentially rooted with the fact that your thyroid is doing its best to take all the resources that it needs to function and put them in what's most important. So it starts to just chip away at the things that it sees as being a little bit more superficial. So that said, some of us will experience what's called primary hypothyroidism. That means that it's just the thyroid is starting to slow down and it's not producing enough thyroid hormone. There's another form of hypothyroidism, which is actually very common. It's the most common form of hypothyroidism, at least in the United States, and that's Hashimoto's disease. And that's an autoimmune disease. And Hashimoto's or autoimmune thyroid disease runs opposite of hypothyroidism, in that it's not directly an issue with the thyroid, it's an issue in the machinery that makes the thyroid hormone. So the immune system starts to accidentally start breaking down the machinery so that that thyroid gland can't produce as much of that thyroid hormone as possible. Now, both of these situations rely on a bunch of nutrients to run those factories, to run those engines, to make sure that all these hormones are being produced the right way. And they also rely on the gut and the health of the gut and the integrity of the gut barrier. In other words, if your gut is tubing, making sure that the tubes of the gut are solid and they're not leaking. And they also rely on the microbiome, or the balance of the good, bad bacteria. And all of those factors as well rely, again, on the way that your body is communicating with other hormones. The adrenal glands produce something called cortisol and DHEA, and they're our stress response gland. The adrenal gland, BFF with the thyroid gland. Those two are absolutely buddies, inseparable. If the adrenal gland is stressed out, it tells the thyroid gland, I'm stressed out. Thyroid gland sympathetically starts to stress out too. So we often talk about the relationship between the adrenal gland and the thyroid. Your sex hormones, estrogens, testosterone, progesterone, etc., all of those will also impact the way your thyroid gland operates. Fertility is impacted by the thyroid gland. So all of these things are connected, and that hormone symphony, all of the way that they interact together, those are all affected when the thyroid gland is affected, and vice versa. Your blood sugar levels, your insulin hormones that are produced also will impact the way that your body makes and uses and creates thyroid hormone. And all of that is just starting to scratch the surface in terms of what your thyroid gland is doing. I want to show you a little graphic. It's a little busy, but it's also on a larger handout. So if you want to get a copy of this, you can, so that you can study it yourself. But this essentially starts to dive a little bit deeper, starts to scratch the surface a little bit deeper. So you can start to see that our thyroid gland, which is that butterfly-shaped gland that sits right under our neck, that is producing what's called T4. T4 is 4 iodine groups clumped together. That's why it's called T4. That T4 has to convert to something called T3. It drops an iodine group. That T3 is actually the biologically active. That's the most effective form of the thyroid hormone that the body can really, really use. That T3 then has to get in a little shuttle. It's essentially a protein that's like a Uber that takes it to throughout the body, and then engages with the cells and the cell receptors. The receptors, you could think of them as doorways. It unlocks the door, gets into the cell, and it starts to speed up metabolism. At every single one of those points, there's an opportunity for us to see a deficiency or to see a problem. From T4 to T3, you may not be producing enough T4, and then you may not be converting enough T4 to T3. You might also, under high stress situations, be making more of what's called reverse T3. You can also then get into that Uber and there's not enough Ubers. And you can also be in a situation where you get to your destination and you change your mind and you don't actually go and interact with that receptor. So the T3 never actually gets out of the Uber, never gets off that protein, and it never actually gets into the cell. And then final is it gets to the cell and it doesn't do anything. It's like wop, wop, nothing happens at the end. So what you see here on this graphic is the opportunities for us in the green to optimize the way that each of those steps are functioning, and then the ways that could potentially tear it down. So let's just do the negative real quick. So stress, things like fluoride, bromide, and chloride. Fluoride, we know as fluoride, we've seen that in multivitamins for kids. We see it in toothpaste, things like that. Excess amounts of fluoride can counter the iodine and make it harder for those iodines to stick together. So can bromide and chloride, which are often used in brominated flour and chlorinated water. Various toxins like pesticides. The presence of autoimmune disease, any autoimmune disease, can actually increase the risk of developing Hashimoto's. Nutritional deficiencies, changes in your hormone balance, like I talked about the estrogens and the insulin, and then certain disease states like insulin resistance, which is a precursor to prediabetes and diabetes. If you have chronic inflammation, if there's immune irregularities or just regular inflammation that's happening through your body, all of these factors can impact one or a combination of these steps. And what we're going to talk about today is not only how we can target the gut, but kind of by proxy, because we're talking about the gut, we're going to talk about some of those nutrients and some of the herbs that we can use to help activate and to really focus on the green side of the slide.
Awesome. I love that explanation. And I was chuckling over here when you said the thyroid is the diva. I was like, yes, that's a great way to put it. I've never thought about it like that, but it's true. I always say hormones run the show, and the thyroid is like the queen bee of all of the hormones. That was wonderful, Lara. I loved all of those nuggets and tidbits. So I'll share my presentation, and then at the end, we can come together, do a little dialogue. There might be an opportunity for anyone that's listening live to type in a question in the chat box. That would be awesome if anyone wanted to do that at the end. So as we're going through, if you have a question that pops to mind, please share it in the chat box and we will hopefully be able to address it at the end. Just a quick question. Can y'all see my screen? Maybe Lara, you could give a quick thumbs up. Yes, awesome. Okay, great. So we have already gotten well underway here. So I'm just going to jump through to this slide here. So talking about the connection between the gut health and thyroid is something that I'm going to cover pretty extensively in this PowerPoint here. And these are based off the questions that you all sent in. So thank you so much for your questions. we literally use that to guide us in what we're going to present. So I don't start making my presentation until I see the questions that everyone asks, so I know what you want to hear. So please, if you see another opportunity to submit questions for an upcoming webinar, take advantage, because those are the questions that I use to put the presentation together. I know Lara gave some wonderful background information, and I'm going to continue on that theme just a little bit longer, and then I'll bring it all together with you at the end. So she mentioned leaky gut, and this is huge. This is a driver of autoimmunity. And let me just explain what that is. If you've listened to past webinars, you've heard us talk about this a little bit, but it's a key concept to understand. So in a healthy gut, our epithelial lining, or that one layer of cells that's in the very, forefront of our gut, it should all be intact. All the cells should be up close, touching each other, and we call those tight junctions. So you can see on the slide here, it says normal tight junctions. You can see they're all like hugging each other, they're friends, and everyone's cool. But then we live through life. And what happens in life? We get excess stress. We're bombarded with toxins in our food supply, in the environment, in the air. We might get exposed to some pathogens, some, viruses or bacteria. And then taking various medications over time, that can even impact the integrity of our gut lining. So we're going through life with all of these insults, and over time, we end up developing what's called leaky gut if we let things get out of control. And you can see on the right side here, I'll circle my cursor over it. You can see now there are gaps in between those cells in our gut lining. And when there's gaps, what happens is the food particles that we eat, they can leak through those gaps, and our immune system, doing the wonderful job that it's trying to do, is trying to protect us. And if it sees something foreign, it wants to attack. And so unfortunately, the food particles are not bad. They're not foreign, but they shouldn't be in our bloodstream, and they're getting in our bloodstream. And so now our immune system is like, okay, alert, activate, and it comes after these food particles and it starts attacking things. And now all of a sudden, before you know it, your immune system is like super on high alert, and any little thing that it thinks it perceives as a threat, it's going to attack. And this is where things go awry, because then we lose what's called immune tolerance. And now it starts to attack our own body cells and tissues. And this is at the core of Hashimoto's and Graves' disease, which are the two most common autoimmune thyroid conditions. So typically in Hashimoto's, you have hypothyroidism, an underactive thyroid, and then in Graves' disease, you have an overactive thyroid. But that is probably not the best way to say it, because like Lara mentioned, it's not really the problem with the thyroid. It's the immune system getting thrown off that's causing the hormones to drop. So now we're going to move into one more key piece of information before I tie it together. So thyroid hormone synthesis. We got to understand a little bit how thyroid hormone is made. So like was mentioned, thyroid hormone is literally tyrosine molecules. So those are amino acids. And these are, if you see on the screen, these little gray things in the middle, that's tyrosine. And then the green eyes, that's iodine. That's crazy to me to think. A molecule of tyrosine, or two molecules, and either 3 or 4 molecules of iodine are running our body. Like, when you really think about that, it's like, whoa, like we're such complex machineries, but then at the same time, it's like the littlest, simplest things can run the show here. So that's what thyroid hormone looks like. 4 molecules of iodine, T4, 3, T3. Now, this on the right is showing you the way that thyroid hormone is made. It starts in our brain. So our brain has to initially send a signal to the thyroid to start the hormone production. So it sends TSH. So if you've been in this boat for a little while where you've been struggling with thyroid issues, you know your doctor's going to run the TSH, and hopefully they're running more than just the TSH, but sometimes they're not. So yeah, if that's a whole other, well, it's not really a whole other topic, but I guess I get frustrated by that. But doctors really should be running a full thyroid panel for those people that are susceptible to having thyroid issues. Anyway, off my soapbox. So TSH is the hormone sent by the pituitary that goes to the thyroid, and it tells it, hey, start producing some thyroid hormone. So initially, the thyroid is going to produce T4 mainly. It produces a small amount of T3, but T3 is the active hormone. So T4 doesn't do a whole lot for us, but it gets converted into T3 by these deiodinase enzymes that literally just break off one of these iodines here and then it becomes the active hormone. So if you see on the right here, it's up at the very top, you see TSH is binding. This is a cell on the thyroid. So the TSH is going to bind to a cell on the thyroid. It's going to bind to its hormone receptor. So down here, you see TSHR. The receptor on the thyroid, it binds this thyroid stimulating hormone, and it's the instructions to start making the thyroid hormone. And you might recognize this especially if you have Graves' disease, and we'll talk about that in a second. But basically, thyroglobulin is a protein in the thyroid, and it contains a lot of these tyrosine residues. And then TPO is the enzyme that basically starts producing the thyroid hormone. And so the reason I'm highlighting these things is because if you get a blood panel run, they're going to hopefully be measuring your thyroglobulin antibodies and thyroid peroxidase antibodies, because those are, and it might be cut off on your screen a little bit, but all those arrows are saying is Graves' disease is when your body is making antibodies, and an antibody is something that is going to attack. It's an immune component that's going to attack, and unfortunately in autoimmune disease, it attacks things that it shouldn't be attacking, part of our own body tissues. So in Graves' disease, you're getting an attack of the thyroid stimulating hormone receptor. What does that do? It causes your thyroid to start overproducing hormones, and you get the typical Graves' disease symptoms. You might get sweaty, you might have anxiety, you might have diarrhea. You don't feel good. Like sometimes people with hypothyroidism think, oh, I wish I had a ton of thyroid hormone, but no one wants too much or too little of anything. So you don't feel good with Graves' disease. You also don't feel good with Hashimoto's, with hypothyroidism, because with this, your body is not attacking the thyroid stimulating hormone receptor. It's attacking the thyroglobulin protein of the thyroid itself, or it's attacking that enzyme that needs to make the thyroid hormone. So you'll see either TGAB, those are the antibodies, or TPOAB. And if they're high on your blood work, that means you have an autoimmune condition where your body is now attacking those components. So now, okay, let's bring this together. What is the connection? These were specifically questions that you all asked. What is the connection between gut health and thyroid function, and how can one impact the other? Okay, so as I was putting this together, I had heard about the thyroid gut axis and all, and I was reading more about it, and I just read this sentence and I laughed, and it said, and I shouldn't laugh, but it said the thyroid gut axis was recently proposed. And the reason why I started thinking about that and laughing was because, you read all these things like, oh, the liver gut axis is proposed. Oh, the gut brain axis is now being proposed. When are we going to just realize like everything is all connected? Like there's an everything axis. There's an adrenal thyroid axis. Like we keep saying, oh, this is like, I don't know, just the way it's phrased in research. Sometimes it's like this novel idea, like, hey, can you believe the thyroid talks to the gut? Well, yeah. And I think this is where Western medicine sometimes, I don't like to use the word goes wrong, but sometimes where people fall through the cracks is because it's very much segmented, and everything really needs to be viewed as this synergistic system. So that's another soapbox I'll get off. Okay, so hypo and hyperthyroid individuals, they are found in the research. There are some systematic reviews, which systematic reviews are basically looking at the consensus of research and trying to draw a more solid conclusion based off what all the research shows, because you can find anything to fit your data. You can find research that says, nope, there's no difference between hyperthyroid people and their gut bacteria. And then you can find research that says that that these things are correlated. And so this systematic review, it said that we do see some clear alterations in the gut bugs and that, the microbiota in people that have hypo and hyperthyroidism versus those who don't, or healthy individuals. And we'll talk about that in a second. But I think, Lara, yeah, you mentioned this in your talk about constipation with hypothyroidism. That hugely impacts our gut health, because when things aren't moving through and when there's stagnation in the gut, you start to get these overgrowths. And then, as I like to say, well, I didn't come up with this, but as people like to say, disease begins in the gut. And then you start to just feel bad when you have this dysbiotic state. It can be, terrible digestive issues. It can be anxiety and depression, because remember, everything's connected. And so that's a huge connection right there. Now, how does the intestinal microbiota influence the thyroid? There are so many ways, but I could have kept going, but I just stopped here. So first of all, the reason I showed that leaky gut slide in the beginning is because we need to understand that our gut microbes are regulating if we have intestinal permeability and if we have immune tolerance. And I'm going to give you a few examples, but think about it like this. So dysbiosis just means you have an imbalance in gut bacteria levels. That's all that means. So it's imbalanced. It could be too much of this guy, too little of that guy. It's just not where it should be. So that leads to leaky gut, which then leads to this immune response. And a lot of times the immune response can be antibodies against the thyroid, the thyroglobulin, the enzyme, or the TSHR antibodies, like I mentioned before. So let's give a specific example here. When we eat fiber, the gut bugs, they feed on that fiber and they produce what's called short chain fatty acids. These are also referred to as postbiotics. So these short chain fatty acids actually are hugely important for maintaining the proper lining of our gut, specifically the short chain fatty acid butyrate. So remember, the only way we're going to get enough butyrate is if we eat fiber. And if our gut bacteria are at the proper levels, but our gut bacteria are at the proper levels if we eat fiber. So it can be a vicious cycle. So our fiber gets turned into butyrate, which is a short chain fatty acid, and butyrate is fuel for those cells in our gut to be intact. So that's one way how the gut health can basically impact the thyroid. And then the other thing is that we can have these bacteria that are releasing toxins. So lipopolysaccharide, or LPS, is a toxin that if you get overgrown gut microbes, they can start releasing these endotoxins. And if you have leaky gut and you have an overgrowth of LPS releasing bacteria, you feel terrible because you're constantly getting toxins released into your system. So first you have to address the overgrowth, and you also have to address the leaky gut. And that's how you fix that. I mean, I make it sound simple. It's not simple, but it can be. It's done. It's done if you are on a good protocol. And here's another really interesting fact. So they have found through research, there is one pathogenic gut microbe in specific, and it's called Yersinia. And Yersinia bacteria can either exacerbate or initiate autoimmune thyroid disease. And I actually wanted to pull this up here. So this is one of my clients, and there's no names on here. I'm HIPAA compliant here, but this is basically just a screenshot of one of their gut tests. And this one was GI map. I like running GI effects a lot as well, but this one is GI map. So Yersinia is right here. Now this person didn't have any, it was below the detectable limits, that's good. This is the bacterial pathogens. But if you run one of these gut tests, which is a poop test, they're really fun to take. If you run one of them and you see really high levels of this, well, what that can do is there are antigens or proteins on this bacteria that are, well, this is the hypothesis, at least. It's not that this isn't like, the for sure solid gospel truth, but this is what scientists believe is happening, is there are some proteins on this Yersinia bacteria that are structurally similar to proteins in the thyroid. And because this is actually a pathogen, the body starts producing antibodies against it. Well, those antibodies can also begin to attack the thyroid. So how fascinating is that if you have an overgrowth of bacteria, it can actually cause your body to start attacking the thyroid. So that is why they believe that you get this correlation of people that have this overgrowth having a higher prevalence of autoimmune thyroid disease. Another correlation that they found is the Prevotella bacteria are lower in autoimmune thyroid disease. And those bacteria are really important for having an anti-inflammatory response in the gut. So if that inflammation response is not in check, inflammation is also tightly tied to autoimmune conditions. And finally, gut microbes can alter the absorption of very key nutrients that you need to form the thyroid hormone. And Lara mentioned this as well, but zinc, iron, iodine, calcium, and vitamin A are just a few that I picked out here. And I focused a little bit more so on some of the minerals, because a lot of times like mineral absorption can be greatly impaired, especially if you have low stomach acid, which, if you have an H. pylori overgrowth, that can cause low stomach acid. And so if you have any issue where you're not absorbing things properly because you have overgrowth, then that can cause you to not have the nutrients you need to form the thyroid hormone. And vitamin A, I probably also should have put vitamin D on here as well, because our fat soluble vitamins can be malabsorbed with dysbiosis too, because those gut microbes can deconjugate bile acids, and we need bile to absorb our fat. So you can get all kinds of chaos, not in a good way, when you have dysbiosis. So this is pretty much the last part here, and I just wanted to show you some examples so you can maybe spot check yourself as you're looking this, say, am I getting enough of this in my diet on a regular basis? And I'll tell you this. So I would say I've been on a pretty good autoimmune paleo protocol diet because as I mentioned, I was diagnosed with Hashimoto's years ago, and it's helped me tremendously. And I pretty much every time I go to the doctor, my antibodies, my TPO and TG are low, and they're within range pretty much every time I go now. Didn't used to be the case. And as much as I love the autoimmune paleo diet, you have to be aware that you're likely to run into some nutrient deficiencies if you're not eating a very broad diet. Now, I do think you can have a wonderful AIP diet and you can do it the right way, and you can prevent these nutrient deficiencies, but you just have to be a little bit more mindful that, for example, in AIP, you're not going to be getting a ton of calcium unless you're eating like a lot of bok choy every day. So shout out to Paleo on the Go for that salmon bok choy meal, because that's a great source of calcium. But dark leafy greens, like if you're not having dairy, then you want to make sure you're getting an abundance of dark leafy greens. And if you're not having nuts and seeds as well. So with your iron, all of these, as I said right here, these nutrients right here are needed for thyroid hormone synthesis. So to actually produce the thyroid hormone: iron, iodine, copper, and calcium. And then I wanted to focus in on iodine for a second. Iodine is immensely important because the thyroid is made of iodine, but I'm going to tell you something in just a second that you need to be aware of. So this is a great source of iodine right here, which are seaweed snacks, a package of these, and it has the avocado oil, which I love, and not some of the inflammatory seed oils. Has 36% of your daily value. This you might recognize, a meal from Paleo on the Go. This has about 30% of your daily value of iodine. So in the Paleo on the Go meals, because they use sea salt, they're seafood based. So sea salt does not contain iodine, but seafood does. So your shrimp is going to contain the iodine. So this is a great source of iodine right here. Any of their salmon dishes are also a great source of iodine. But what I really want everyone to be aware of is you have to have caution. And maybe at the end of this would be a great chit chat with Lara and I, is the whole iodine deal, because you don't want too little iodine, but you also don't want too much, because that can either exacerbate or spark up an autoimmune condition. And so you'll hear a lot that supplementing, and you'll see in the research that supplementing with the high dose iodine absolutely is contraindicated. I mean, it's not advised in an autoimmune thyroid disease, but you do need iodine for your thyroid to function. So the best takeaway I could give is you want to get a balanced amount from your food. That is typically the best way to go. So you also need some nutrients to convert the thyroid hormone. So remember, T4 is not active. It has to convert into T3. And we absolutely need selenium. That is what's called a cofactor for the enzyme that converts T4 to T3. So you need your selenium to make that reaction happen. And then you also need zinc. So zinc is also very important to allow that. It has some activity to regulate that enzyme. It's not a cofactor for it, but it helps to regulate it. So selenium and zinc. Now, I have to also mention vitamin A, because vitamin A kind of like unlocks the door. I think Lara referenced this. It allows the thyroid hormone to enter the cell and be active. If the thyroid hormone is not getting into the cell, and if it's not active, it doesn't matter how much T3 you have in your blood. It needs to get into the cell. So you have to make sure that you're having enough vitamin A, but you have to make sure you're absorbing your fat soluble vitamins. Remember, fat soluble vitamins A, D, E, and K need fat to be absorbed. So that's important. If you ate a whole, let's say you ate 10 carrots, but that's all you ate, very little of that vitamin A is going to get into your body if you're not having a little bit of fat with it. So the key nutrient to regulate your immune response is vitamin D. And if your levels are below 50, I would say, on your blood work, it's going to show that it's in range, but it may not be optimal for you to keep your immune system functioning optimally. So with anyone with an autoimmune condition, I'm looking to make sure, is their vitamin D not just okay, which is above 30, but is it optimal to mitigate and to reduce flare-ups? So vitamin D is important. Those are my references, and I'll stop my share here, and then we can chit chat, Lara, for the last however long everyone wants to listen for.
Phenomenal, first of all. And I only disagree with one point, which is I wanted more of your soapboxes because you're dead on.
It's funny. When I met with you for office hours one time when you were my professor, I got on a soapbox with you there. I'm trying to remember what it was. I'm like, I get on soapboxes too much. I
love them. No, I'm here for them.
Oh man. Yeah. Oh, I remember what it was. Okay. I'm going to share it. I hope y'all appreciate this. So my dad had come back from the doctors and, basically I'd been trying to help my dad to lower his cholesterol and showing him like fiber is amazing for lowering cholesterol, especially if someone's not eating fiber. And I was trying to like show him, hey, here are some things that you can do that should help to lower your cholesterol. He gets back from the doctor and he comes over to me. He's like, so guess what? The doctor said I can eat whatever I want because it's not gonna impact cholesterol. And I was so upset. I just walked into the other room. And so, Lara, I mentioned to you, I was like, how is it that we could get sued if we try to overstep our boundaries and like play doctor, but doctors can't get sued for playing nutritionist? I'm like,
and getting it wrong and bluntly getting the science wrong, frankly. And I remember this conversation because I remember we bonded over that specific statement. You can eat whatever you want. Because I mean, if I had $1 for every time I heard that when I was dispensing statin medications for cholesterol, right? So it's such a common, pervasive thought. I do think it's changing. I'm going to color this with a positive light. I do think that it's shifting. Not only is there more significant research coming out really showing that food and diet is really important and foundational, but it's really starting to change the conversation in terms of the guidance and the guidelines and the way physicians are being taught about diet. So I do think change is on the way, but yeah, I remember bonding over that frustration.
Oh man. But yeah, I think that having these conversations here, that's the only way things will begin to shift is, bringing the research to people. And then also, letting people go through the research and see for themselves. And that's why I believe you have a resource that you're going to give to people at the end here. If Lauren wants to share the one that I have as well, which basically the one that I have is showing different micronutrient food sources and the role that the micronutrient plays in the body, because it's so amazing. Like, we had at Bridgeport, we had a whole class on just the nutrients and their roles in the body. And you could learn about that for years and still not fully understand like how comprehensive a single nutrient is in its role in our health.
Then you throw on top of that the next level, which is how then that interacts with the microbiome, and then how the body absorbs and utilizes, and how that they're actually competing with various other compounds for absorption. There is a whole play, there's a whole dynamic play that's happening on the gut level. I love this conversation so much, but there's such a dynamic play happening on the gut level. Not only are we absorbing nutrients, you touched on a few vitamins, minerals, which are macronutrients, right? But everything micronutrients. Those are micronutrients. But everything, including macronutrients, so our proteins, our carbohydrates, those fibers, the amino acids in the proteins, the fats, the way that they're absorbing, all are dictated by that environment in the gut. Those vitamins and minerals, sometimes because of the gut environment, the microbiome environment, that leaky gut, the intestinal permeability, sometimes it's called, that is going to impact the way you absorb those nutrients and how much of those nutrients you actually need. If you are exposed to heavy metals, for example, some of those minerals can compete with the heavy metals for absorption. And then on the others, and then there's this whole fascinating area of phytonutrients, which are the colorful compounds that we think maybe there's like 30,000 of them, but there might be even more. But all these food compounds are in live food that then they don't just come into the body and do their thing. No, they have a whole conversation with the microbiome, communicating to the microbiome stuff about the environment. And then the microbiome then turns around and goes, well, this is the tea I just heard. So let me turn these genes on, let me turn these genes off. And it completely modulates the genetics. And that's where epigenetics comes in. So when we talk about your genes aren't your destiny, and that environment and lifestyle starts to change the way that your genes will express. It's this conversation that's happening between the food that you're eating, the phytonutrients, those live active compounds, the conversation with the microbiome itself, all of that is all the steps needed to get to the part where your genes go, you know what, let's turn this on and let's turn this off. And I think this is, you sort of alluded to this, so I'm going to pull this thread a little bit more. Mm-hmm. Your body is actually trying to protect you. We often think, and I think this is just the way, so we're taught medicine. We often think, oh, if something is broken, that must be because there's something wrong. Like genetically, there's a breakdown. There's something wrong physiologically with this condition. And that might be true in certain cases, absolutely. However, what if we flip that idea on its head and we assume that the body is actually protecting you? Every time it was making one of these shifts or these moves, it's actually in service to trying to protect you. It thinks it needs to hype up your immune system to protect you from an invader. And that accidentally trips the switch for autoimmune disease, and it ends up marking the wrong thing.
Yeah.
Right. So it's an error in a pathophysiology, but it's based in, frankly, self-love. It's trying to make sure that you're doing okay. Right. And so when we think about it that way, we start to think that all these processes are actually in response to the environment, our food, our lifestyle, our stressors, our day-to-day physical activity, how we sleep, how well we don't sleep, right? All of those factors are communicating messages to the body and telling it, we need to be on lockdown and we need to figure out what is going on outside. And that's actually what trips up disease. And that's why so much of chronic disease can be modulated by lifestyle factors. Because once you change the messaging and you make the body feel like it's safe, that changes the conversation within the body.
Yeah, it is actually a theme that I've gotten really into, is like, how can we send the body signals of safety? And it's a really underappreciated topic, especially, for scientists. Like we would consider ourselves scientists, but there's this whole emotional aspect into our health. And, like I had mentioned, the brain is sending the signal to the thyroid. So it starts in the brain, and you're an emotional state. We're emotional beings. And so that all links in too. Yeah, absolutely. And when you said about the phytochemicals, I kind of knew in the back of my head years ago that there was a difference between phytochemicals and vitamins and minerals, but it really hit me like after going through UB. I was like, wait a minute. I'm like, so you got vitamins and minerals, but then you have like you said, tens of thousands of these other compounds that no one ever really talks about. It's like, did you get your vitamins and minerals? But did you get your thousands of phytochemicals? And how are you going to do that if you're not eating a diversity of foods? And so, it's that whole conversation that sometimes I'll allude to, which is, can I just like eat Chick-fil-A all day and pop multivitamins, or do I have to actually get my nutrients from food? Well, you're not going to get your phytochemicals from pills. And, as much as like, I know that there's supplements and stuff that can give you phytochemicals, but I just always feel there's no replacement for the real deal. Not that I'm against supplements, but I think there's
not only is your gut instinct put on type, and that pun is intended, not only is your gut instinct right on, but that's what the research is starting to show. If you look at the ultra processed food research, right, that's saying the ultra processed foods are very, very deranged from where they started out, literally increased risk of chronic disease. That's because you're changing the physiology of the food from its natural state. You're extracting and removing a lot of those natural compounds, including the phytonutrients. You're in some cases even altering the biochemical structure of some of the foundational nutrients, like the fats and the fibers, for example. And the body's like, what even is this? Yeah. And that is sending a stress signal in addition to the nutrient deficiency. So even when we fortify the food, it's not the same.
Yeah, definitely. And so as you're saying this, I'm thinking in my head, and I think this is a good topic for discussion, is it's not that like every food needs to be eaten raw. So that's not what we're saying. Like tomatoes, for example, tomatoes technically aren't AIP, but that's a whole other topic where, hey, you actually might be fine if you're on an AIP diet eating tomatoes. That would be probably a reintroduction food.
That's its own webinar and a great topic.
Yeah, but so basically, I mean, yeah, that's definitely another webinar. But I would encourage people, if you're on AIP, to work with someone to see what otherwise healthy foods could be reincorporated in to increase the diversity of your diet, but you can use AIP as the base. Anyway, tomatoes, for example, lycopene, the bioavailability increases when you cook it a little bit. And like, you know, I know there are some people out there that eat raw meat, but that's not what we're saying, you know, so it's not like everything has to be like completely.
And I would argue, to your point, a lot of things, it's processing versus ultra processing. I want to be really clear about that difference, because everything from soaking to cooking to fermenting, like all of those are processing techniques, right? Like no one's suggesting that we eat raw meat for as an example, although that is a delicacy.
Yeah.
So, that aside, we want to make sure that we're clear that ultra processing is where we're talking about like a Dorito versus a corn, even versus like a tortilla, right? Like there's a difference between those types of processing and how it's made that changes and strips the nutritional components, and then the body then doesn't recognize it. But I think that's a really good point, that the nutrients within their food structure are designed in such a way that it actually enhances its bioavailability when eaten a certain way. And when we change it a little bit, when we take a food and we might eat it raw, or we might then put it on a grill, or then we might ferment it, all of those things are great. And I think we need to stop comparing. There are cases where some things are just not bioavailable, like don't eat raw quinoa, like period, end of story, right? Like don't do that. But soak it before you cook it, and you significantly reduce the content of the anti-nutrients that block the absorption and the ability for us to break down the quinoa, right? Like, so there are steps that we can take towards improving bioavailability, and some of them are necessary in order for us to be able to actually consume that food and get all the nutrients out of it. But once we get to that point, we start diversifying the way we take it in, we really hit that like next level in terms of getting our food and our diversity of nutrients and the diversity of color and phytonutrients. And a cool tip that I learned from Dr. Deanna Minnick, who is just like the goddess of colorful eating and colorful food and biochemistry when it comes to food absorption, talks a lot about how to activate these phytonutrients. That's what she specializes in. And she gave a really cool tip. She said, when the food changes color and becomes brighter from whatever technique you're using, that's how you know you fully activate those colorful compounds. So think of broccoli, and think about like when you first take broccoli out of your fridge, right? And you go to steam it, and within like 2 or 3 minutes, it gets super bright green. You're activating a lot of those phytonutrients that create that green, bright color. You overcook it, and we've all had the soggy, overcooked broccoli. What happens? It starts to get like a weird green, right? Like it's this sort of bland green. You've over oxidized it, and you've gotten to a point where you've kind of like killed off some of those active compounds, right? And you'll notice that with different foods, where you'll see the shift in the brightness of those colors because they're really popping out certain phytochemicals from that particular intervention.
It's great. Thank you for sharing that. I'm going to share that nugget with clients, because what I usually tell them on that note is, you know, I'm not saying that you have to eat raw veggies all day. As a matter of fact, if people have sensitive guts, it's probably not the best to be eating a ton of raw foods. That's too tough on the digestive system. So lightly cooking. And what I always tell people is you have to be careful of the oxidation of the oils. Like if you're cooking the broccoli, and let's say you're cooking it in, I like to do either avocado or coconut oil because they have higher smoke points. So let's say you're lightly cooking it in that on the stove. If you start to see all the black crusties on the pan, like you got some oxidation. And I mean, you can look at a plate of black crusted broccoli and think, okay, that's probably not as healthy as that like lovely green colored broccoli that was lightly cooked over on that pan, right? So there's some things that we kind of know common sense, but when you stop to think about it, like now because we've all had the busy days where we forget the food is cooking on the stove and we're like, dang it, I overcooked it. So what I do is I'll try to like peel sometimes the layers of the black off. Like sometimes if I'm cooking like plantains or Brussels sprouts and they're cooked, like I'll peel the little black pieces off. I'm like, okay, I'm not going to eat those little pieces there. So little things like that I think
you still have to do it in life. Like, there's so much happening. I always tell my patients, like, I don't want you on your way to optimizing your diet and lifestyle and trying to like focus on stress and sleep, that you're like making yourself stressed on your way to be unstressed. Like that is the most counterproductive thing that we could possibly do. And frankly, like seriously, it leads to disordered eating and patterns of food obsession that are not healthy and are not going to serve us in the long run. So I always say life is a long time. You're going to have to do this every single day. And part of diet isn't necessarily eating the right food at the right time just today or tomorrow, right? Well, diet really works for me. It feels good. Fantastic. Does it still feel good in a year? Does it still feel good in 5 years? Are you still getting everything you need in 10 years? In your 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, are you still going to be thriving on this diet, right? This is a long time for us to think about. In humans, we are so short-sighted. We are just immediate gratification, immediate pleasure, immediate safety, right? So we're thinking about really what's around us right now. And frankly, we live stressful lives. Let's just be honest, right? So I think at the end of the day, it's really important to think about what's going to be sustainable long-term. And I always tell patients, what I want you to do is to be able to eat a diet to get your body to a point where it's so resilient, you're so strong, not just physically, but psychologically, emotionally, spiritually, that these little dings, if you end up going to Europe and having some gluten because you're in Italy, or you end up traveling somewhere that has delicious food that typically is not on your diet, that you can handle it a little bit, you can have a taste, or you can even indulge in a meal without having immediate side effects, you probably have a little bit more resilience and you can bounce back and get back to normal. It's about getting your immune system, your gut health, your barrier function, your microbiome, and your stress and resilience to a point where over the course of time, you can have these little indulgences without it completely wreaking havoc on your body. And again, those are just examples, but and everybody's situations are going to be a little bit different, but that's really kind of like the mentality we want to have. This is a marathon and not a sprint.
Well said. I phrase it like this to my clients, pretty much exactly what you said. I'm like, all right, before we dive in, if any of what I say stresses you out today, disregard it. And we're not going to add that to your plan. Like if what I'm recommending is too stressful for you to follow, let me know and we'll just disregard it, because like you said, stress and sleep are so key. They're at the foundation. So I love that you said that. And thank you, because sometimes I forget to remind people that. So I do see some questions over here. I don't know if Lara, if you're cool, if we answer.
Let's dive into the questions, because often that sparks more questions. And also I want to make sure we get to the questions, because honestly, I can chat to you all day. So
I was like, wait a minute, as we were answering or talking about that last thing, I'm like, oh my gosh, wait, I told people to ask questions and here I am looking at their questions. So we can go down the list. I'm just reading the first one out loud. Is gliadin and gluten still considered equally bad for zonulin in the intestinal walls? Still all grains for gluten sensitivity. So I'll kind of share what I think is being asked here, and then Lara will chit chat about it. So gliadin is the protein in gluten. And so like I know on a stool test that I run, it's one of the immunogenic proteins in gluten. So on the stool test that I'll run for my clients, it looks at anti-gliadin levels to see if there are antibodies against the protein gliadin in gluten, meaning, hey, this person's immune system is actually getting aggravated by gluten. So to calm the immune response, this person will be best suited going gluten-free. And what's interesting is sometimes people that go gluten-free still don't see the resolution of symptoms until they go grain-free. So, back to the whole conversation of stress, and we don't want to be too restrictive with our diet. So we don't want to just like blindly say, hey, you can't eat any grains. So an AIP diet does not include grains, but our goal, exactly what Lara just mentioned, is to get your body resilient enough to where you can have some high quality organic grains, right? Maybe you soak the quinoa first to make the anti-nutrient.
Yep.
So I would say, in regards to that question, and then Lara, you jump in, is there are multiple proteins in gluten. And here in the United States, I love that you said if you want to go to Europe and have some pasta, because here in the United States, it tends to be a bigger offender to people's systems, and people that have terrible reactions to gluten here can go to Europe and have some pizza or whatever. And they're like, hey, I'm cool. So I'm not sure if that fully answered, but Lara, let me let you add a couple things and I can jump back in after.
So I understood it as a question about cross-contamination also to grains. And I think you made a good point. Let me color in with, this is especially relevant, I think, for Hashimoto's, and it's still debated for primary hypothyroidism, whether or not gluten is a trigger for these. And I think there is a deeper kind of discussion that's worth having here, in that there's a couple different things that might be at play. Number one, it could absolutely be the gluten that is impacting somebody. And we have something called non-celiac gluten sensitivity. For those that don't have outright celiac disease, that could potentially be sensitive to gluten anyway. And we also know that if you have Hashimoto's, you have an increased risk of developing celiac disease, right? So there's sort of a connection and a little triangle that's happening there. There's actually also an emerging body of evidence that's saying, you know what, it may not be necessarily the gliadin in it. It may actually be the concentration and the way that we grow our wheat happens to also have higher levels of pesticides. And because in, like, let's use Europe as an example, in Europe, they have wheat species that aren't the same as ours. And so there's a difference in sort of the concentration of those proteins that could aggravate the immune system in the gut. And so the presence of those pesticides, the concentration of those wheat proteins might actually be stirring up the gut environment. You stir that in a pot with, toxins in the environment, microplastics, hormonal disruption, stress, all that stuff. It tends to aggravate the gut barrier. And so it might be sort of impacting the gut function, the immune function at a gut level, and that's causing food sensitivities. And then those food sensitivities become more significant to things like grains and things that look like grains, for example. So like nuts and seeds for some people, right? So I think that sort of underscores the idea that, one, it probably depends. I don't necessarily eliminate grains for somebody just because they have a gluten sensitivity, at least not like long term. We might do that initially. But I would say that it's worth identifying how significant. There's genetic markers that you could test for that could tell you your susceptibility to potentially developing celiac disease or even gluten sensitivity. Identifying what your gut status looks like, what your microbiome looks like, doing regular testing if that's available to you so that you can see what your gut status looks like. And then the gold standard still at the end of the day is always going to be elimination and then challenge. So I'll often do a 4 to 6 week elimination of a particular food. And then I will do a very careful, we're like doing lab science experiments, right? Like 4 days, we're going to do this. And like, in the morning, in the afternoon, you're going to do this. And we're gradually reintroducing one specific food to see how you're reacting to it. So that's called elimination and then re-challenge. And that informs us a lot because it really forces us to hone in on one specific thing and whether that you're reacting to that. So short answer, it may not matter because you may not necessarily have a reactivity to it. But if you're noticing that if after you've soaked your grains well, and you're getting good quality types of grains and you're cooking them and you're still not tolerating them, there might be something else going on with your microbiome, either overgrowth or undergrowth that are just not jiving with those fibers and proteins, or you might have a more significant reactivity to something else that's related. And so it's crossing communication and creating this sort of exaggerated response.
Love that. That's a great answer. And I do love the elimination challenge because your body will tell you, and if you're systematic about it. I actually yesterday was putting a client on an elimination. I start if I feel like it's warranted for someone, I will start, even if they don't have an autoimmune condition, I will have them do a week or two of AIP just to see if they start noticing a resolution of some of their symptoms, like whether it's bloating or brain fog, and then systematically reintroduce foods with them. And usually it works like a charm. So,
and I emphasize the gold is in the challenge and not just the elimination. Like you could feel great for a lot of different reasons when you go on an AIP, right? But why specifically? That's the gold nugget, because once you understand what you're actually reacting to, and frankly, some things subside. I've a million times over, I've taken people off of stuff. We've re-challenged it. It used to be something that bothered them. Now they can tolerate it. So when you sort of give the gut a chance to calm down a little bit, that often kind of resets the stage. And now you get much more clarity about what's actually bothering you versus what's creating an issue. The analogy, you can tell I love analogies. My analogy that I give my patients is that if you've ever, stood in line outside a bar or a club, it was like a million years ago for me. So, but like I vaguely remember standing outside of a club and there would be a bouncer, and the bouncer was responsible for making decisions who got in, who got out. You looked cool enough, you got in, you didn't look cool, they bounced you out. And there's always going to be like the drunk idiot that like pisses off the bouncer, and now the bouncer's aggravated, and now he's just like taking it out on everybody online, right? Your immune system is essentially that bouncer. And when there's one thing that's aggravating that immune system, it's going to take it out on everybody else. So you might be like reactive to, let's say, dairy, right? But now because it's so aggravated, it's like, you know what? I don't like you today. You're bothering me. And so it creates this kind of cross reactivity.
That is so good. I love that analogy. It's a good one. I will never forget that now, Lara. See, there's another question that kind of touched on what I was going to suggest we talk about with the iodine. And this person says, let me see if there's a name here. Michelle. Michelle asks, should folks with hyperthyroidism avoid iodine, calcium, etc.? So I would love to get, Lara, your take on this. My stance currently on iodine, and we mentioned this before the webinar broadcasted, but I told Lara, I was like, hey, if there's something I say where you have an alternative perspective, please share, even if it's like against what I'm saying, what I've read, because we both agree that our opinions are constantly changing in this field. And so like, we're very open to like, learning a perspective that's different than ours and reassessing where we stand. But with iodine, where I currently stand is it's the Goldilocks effect. And so I've had doctors recently tell me that I need to be taking this mega dose iodine, and I didn't feel comfortable with that because I do have an autoimmune thyroid disease. And what I've understood about it is you need to get the dosing at an adequate level, but excessive can really flare it. So what I would say is, should you avoid iodine? I don't think you should avoid it. I think, because it is a component, but I mean, should you have less than the RDA? That's something that like slightly less than the RDA, and make sure you're not make sure there's no iodine in your supplements, I would say, like megadose iodine, but I don't think you need to necessarily avoid seafood. But Lara, what do you think about that topic?
I love the Goldilocks rule. I think that's a great way of putting it. Frankly, a lot of things are Goldilocks rules when it comes to nutrition. I think there's a couple things to keep in mind. There's a big difference between eating iodine in your food and supplementing iodine. The one biggest thing being, iodine's a big guy. Like it takes a lot to absorb iodine. A lot of people don't realize we don't absorb 100% of what we eat, even if your digestion is perfect. And part of the reason for that is because it's competing with other minerals and nutrients for absorption. And iodine will compete with other minerals in order to be absorbed. And so you're not going to get 100% from the food base, but when it's coming in hot in a capsule form or whatever form the supplement is in, it's going to have a higher bioavailability, assuming that's a high quality supplement. So I would say avoiding food that contains iodine or calcium. Please do not avoid calcium rich foods. The opposite, I would say. You really want to maximize on your mineral base. I think that there is, it's interesting. This is very anecdotal, but I've got two examples that contradict each other. First example, I got the opportunity to shadow under a physician in New York City who is like phenomenal, top of his game, awesome physician. And I would sit in a consultation with him and I watched him put iodine topically on somebody's wrist who was Hashimoto's. And that's like such a no-no. Like you do not give iodine to somebody who has Hashimoto's. And he said in his experience, which I trust implicitly, that he's never seen topical iodine be a problem for individuals. And in fact, he's seen it actually help regulate. Part of the reasoning might be because it's not going through the gut. So there's a different sort of mechanism there. And two, what's happening, the iodine might be out competing. Remember I mentioned those fluoride, chloride, bromide, it might be competing against those halogens. So if you think back to the element table in chemistry class, those halogens had very special properties. And I don't know if you remember, but those halogens are like magnets and they love to attach themselves to literally anything. And so they are very competitive with iodine for attaching to those molecules, the tyrosine molecules that you showed us earlier. So there is a theory that having more iodine helps to outcompete some of those halogens that we inevitably have in our environment. So theoretical, we don't know 100%. The complete opposite of that story is that I saw an individual who was working with a different clinician. She came to me after she had a bad experience with another clinician, unfortunately, that hyperdosed her on iodine because she was diagnosed with hypothyroidism. And at the time she didn't have any antibodies. Within 6 months, developed a significant case of Hashimoto's and definitely had antibodies in like the 800s. Yep. So my point is that I don't know that there's a straight answer here. I don't think avoiding food is necessary. I don't think going under the recommended daily recommendations is necessary, but I don't think supplementation in an autoimmune condition is recommended. And I think that if it's non-autoimmune, you can supplement. Do not hyperdose. I don't believe in mega dosing on any supplement because that's just not natural. It's not the way our body is built. And I think ideally, in a perfect world, we would check iodine levels first. We would do screening on your nutrition in your blood, or however different nutrients are measured in different ways, but I won't belabor that point. We would check what your blood work says, and we would use that to base our recommendations on whether or not you need to supplement or not.
That's great. Yeah. So I think we're on the same page there. What's interesting with the iodine is this is something that I would personally like to do more research on as to how do we assess someone's iodine levels. With so many nutrients, we have clear ways to do it that are like gold standard. With vitamin D. Actually, this could be argued too. We test the 25 OHD, but the biologically active one is the 125 hydroxylase. So we actually aren't testing the biologically active vitamin D. And I still
we don't have data on the biologically active, so we continue to test the non-biologically active, and round we go. So yeah.
So that is something where I want to do more research on to better understand that. But I'll tell you what I do now with clients is like, hey, if someone is open to running the full range of blood work, I'm like, hey, see if your doctor's cool with adding in the 125 version of vitamin D. But usually I think it usually correlates well, but sometimes people are over converted, sometimes under. Anyway,
I think that's actually why that to me is a reason why we should be checking more frequently, because imagine if we always knew what our normal levels were, right? What we had an average over time, then we would be able to tell when something was off, and we would actually have much better data. To your point, because we lack the data, we lack the recommendations. And so we're sort of, even if I ran both, if I said, hey, go get the 25 and the 125, I wouldn't know what to target ideally on the 125, unless you have kidney disease, because that's the only place we have guidance on it. So it's a catch-22. I will say for iodine, the best, and I use quotes because we don't have, again, data to really substantiate, the ideal method is urinary iodine. Seems to be the best way for us to assess iodine. So it's doable. It's not too expensive. Is it practical? I don't know. I think it really depends. I probably, if you are avoiding everything, there's a question about where you get iodine. If you're not eating seafood, you can definitely use iodized salt. There are forms of salt that are added iodine, even the sea salt forms. And then there's algae, seaweed is a great source of iodine as well. So, if you're not eating any of those foods and I'm really concerned about your iodine levels, I might push the testing a little bit more for iodine, but I don't frankly do it regularly because it's not the most convenient.
Yeah. And something that I was reading is a discussion whether so urinary iodine was kind of where I'm like putting my bets on right now as well for the best way to assess iodine. The thing that I was reading that gave me a little bit of pause was, is it more so reflective of recent intake? And so that's something I need to understand that perspective a little bit more. But I've actually done a urinary iodine just because I love data. I'm like, what? I don't know. Like, let me just see what we're at here with, Hashimoto. So let's see what we're at.
And I don't think we throw it away because it's recent. I think we just know that that's the case, and we sort of adjust for that in our interpretation of it, right? Like that. So yeah, it's that topic comes up a lot in terms of testing and the nutrition testing space. Frankly, the testing space in general, it's getting a lot of attention now, which I'm excited for, but there's a lot of unanswered questions like that.
Yeah, for sure. So maybe we can answer. I mean, I don't have a client until later, so I'm cool. Like,
I've got time. Let's do this. It's fun.
Okay, awesome. So
you guys tell us when you want us to stop.
Yeah, Lauren, just like I don't mind. I don't have anyone just yet, so I'm cool. But I see a question here that says, is there a protocol you recommend? I've done several leaky gut ones and nothing has stuck. So maybe Lara, we jump in on the 4 R's for.
I call it 5R. By the way.
Oh, the 5 R's. Okay. Okay. So let's start with, you have to remove things, right? And this kind of ties in a little bit to someone that says, I have H. pylori and IBS-C high antibodies. How would you treat without antibiotics? So you have to remove any pathogens. And I would say if you have never done a gut stool test, that would be a really, really key piece right there, because it's going to give you so much information. Now, it's not perfect. I don't sit here and say that these gut tests are the end all be all. They give us all the answers. There's definitely flaws in them. You have to consider things with a grain of salt, but like, hey, can we see from their low elastase, which is your pancreatic enzyme function? And do you continue to have relapse because you're not breaking down your food properly? And now you're getting undigested food going down further into your intestines. And you're going to have this continual relapse until you start getting better digestion. And then you can supplement with enzymes for that while your body is healing. Ultimately, the goal would be to get your digestive system to get back online itself. But sometimes it can't do that if it's not absorbing nutrients. So sometimes you have to start by supplementing with some digestive support, whether it's enzymes or hydrochloric acid, but that needs to be done according to your test. Like you don't want to just like necessarily like throw in a bunch of hydrochloric acid in the system if you don't need it. So you kind of need to see like, what is your why? I've talked about that before, but why are you in this position? You can see in general, like, do you have these crazy overgrowths? Do you have a pathogen, or are your levels very low? Because what I can tell you is, like, if I have a client and their levels are of, pathogens or bacterial overgrowths are really high, there's some great herbal antimicrobials for that. But if they're having, person B has the same issues, but we run their stool test and their levels are wiped out because, hey, maybe they've been on antibiotics, I'm not going to give them an herbal antimicrobial, because I don't want to, their problem is they need to like eat more fibers or get their levels up a little higher. So basically the protocol needs to start by looking at your levels and addressing your why. And then once you remove things, then you can heal and seal the gut with, I'll let Lara go through the 5 R's, but you got to heal and seal the gut with repairing. And there's some great nutraceuticals for that, whether it's aloe or slippery elm. I know like a product I really like is GI Revive by Designs for Health. And then adding in, good fibers and nutrients. So that's like the overlay, but Lara, you can dive in on specifics.
So I'm going to start by saying what the mistakes that people make, and then I'm going to layer it into the 5R protocol. And you might see yourself in this. First of all, let me start by saying I agree that in an ideal situation, we absolutely should get some testing, and particularly stool testing, and understand what's going on there. And we need to do a good assessment. We need to actually talk to the patient and just know exactly what's going on. What are your symptoms? So often, I think we don't realize our symptoms are actually as obstructive as they are, because we've normalized them. It's always been like this. I just always assumed it was normal to poop 3 times a week or twice a week, right? I'm like, that is not normal. Actually, we need to talk about that, right? Yeah. So there's sometimes it's within that conversation, we identify opportunities to improve. Just talking about poop. Like, I joke all the time, like all I do all day is talk about poop, but just talking about stool, how often, what its quality, what its color, how it smells. Did you know that poop isn't supposed to like run people out of the house? That's actually telling something about the quality of the poop and what's in there and how your body's metabolizing your food. All of that is really valuable information that can help us to understand what your body is doing with the food after it's entered your digestive tract, and what the quality of the microbiome is and the digestive function that you have. So that paired with a stool test that gives me all this quantitative, reliable data in terms of what good bacteria there is, what bad bugs might be overgrowing, where your digestive health lies, what you're absorbing, what you're not absorbing, if you're reacting to something. That is the top. That is the Cadillac ideal situation. Fantastic. That said, once we do all of that, we understand, we target it, here's what I think goes wrong. So I say 5R. The standard 4 R's are remove, replace, reinoculate, rebalance. Remove, replace, reinoculate, repair. And my 5th one is rebalance, right? Okay. And I'm going to start with rebalance, because that is, in my opinion, the number one mistake everybody makes when they do a 5R protocol. And that's including my colleagues. Number one mistake. Rebalance implies that what we're supposed to do is actually address all the factors that impact gut health. That means stress, sleep, and exercise. That means not ignoring the fact that if you are doing the most perfect protocol and you are still not able to manage your stress, or you're sleeping 4 or 5 hours a night, your microbiome is not going to be happy. If you are still eating your lunch while you're answering emails and watching the news, that is not going to favorably impact your gut. If you are not chewing your food, and I am guilty, I don't chew my food enough. I always have to myself, right? You're not chewing your food adequately, you're also not going to get very far addressing your gut. If you are not dealing with traumas, emotional eating, like all these factors that impact our digestion lie at the foundation. And that to me is the bottom of the pyramid. We have to make sure that we're addressing those. And very often that gets skipped in favor of doing these complex protocols or focusing on what antibacterials to use, et cetera, et cetera. So that's my number one tip, is make sure that the boring basics of not hydrating while you're eating, of not multitasking while you're eating, chewing adequately, addressing your relationship with food, making sure that you are addressing sleep, stress, and exercise, all those factors, those need to be taken care of. And I would say that that sort of sits in the background. It's not a step-by-step kind of thing. It's all like all the time, as best as we can. Obviously, again, not stressing ourselves out as we get there. So that's number one. Number two mistake I see is people overuse antimicrobial herbs. Mm-hmm. We need to respect antimicrobial herbs. I don't want to see you sprinkling oregano oil on everything because it's antimicrobial, right? We need to really be careful how we're using these concentrated solutions. It's one thing to eat garlic, which is antimicrobial, antiviral, anti-yeast. It's like it kills vampires. I mean, that's how powerful that stuff. That's where that story comes from, right? It's so powerful. It could kill a vampire. So of course it's going to take care of a little GI issue, right? It's different when you supplement it than it is when you eat it, right? Those high concentrations of these antimicrobials, including oregano, is very different when you're using it in a culinary way versus when you're using it as a supplement, and it's very concentrated and very direct. So very often I find that people are using these on an ongoing basis. And so that then changes, to your point, Lindsey, the microbiome to begin with. And we're starting to see levels of things that are off just because we've sort of killed off the wrong guys, or they moved into the wrong neighborhoods of the gut. And so we start to see this displacement, and that creates some issues there. They also have other activities. They do other things too. So sometimes those other activities can impact that stuff. So that I would say from the remove phase, I'd say that was one issue. The other thing is they're starting to see some resistance and more powerful pathogenic bugs. And so I do see recurring cases of SIBO. Somebody mentioned IBS. These are all usually due to microbial imbalances. And because of antibiotic resistance, sometimes we do have to do controlled multiple rounds. We have to pick those herbals very carefully. And sometimes we do have to alternate them with prescription antibiotics to really get them. And they have to be in specific combinations. So getting the right protocol or the right duration at the right time, at the right dose is very, very important. The second thing I would say kind of falls a little bit into the rebalance, a little bit into the repair, and that is immune system. Is making sure that you have the nutrients needed. We've been talking about vitamin A a lot, zinc a lot, because those are really important from an immune system perspective. They're also important for gut health directly, so both directly and indirectly. But getting the right nutrients in and making sure those are fortified, making sure that your stress response significantly impacts your immune response, and making sure that your hormone levels are in the right place, that you're making enough immunoglobulin, so you have enough immune presence to actually fight the battle. Because a lot of people think it's the antimicrobial that's doing the work. It's not. The antimicrobial is teaching your body how to respond to the invader. Just like I talked about before, the phytonutrients come in, talk to the gut bacteria, and the gut bacteria turns on and off certain genetic markers. The adaptogenic qualities of those herbs is actually teaching our body how to respond not only to stress, but also things that come along with stress, like immune invaders, right? So when we're not actually fully bolstering the system up to make sure that it can do the job, you can take all the berberine in the world. It's not going to do anything because your body doesn't have the resources to actually go and fight this battle, right? So whenever I need to do a 5R, we do a we do a stool test. Even before we do the stool test, first thing I do is that rebalance. We're going to start really focusing on that rebalance piece, and we're going to start focusing. I'm not even going to bother. I'm just going to assume we need to focus on immune function. That might be vitamin D, vitamin A, zinc, etc. I'm going to check to see if your iron levels are okay, because a lot of people with dysbiosis also can't absorb their iron from their food. And that is such a low hanging fruit for so many things, right? So we're going to balance all those nutrients that are needed to really fortify the immune system. I'm going to make sure you're pooping every day. I have so many tricks up my sleeve of how to get you to poop, to make sure you're pooping at least every other day, if it's really like the because constipation can get really bad. But my goal is every single day that you're having a good, healthy poop, because you need to be able to poop stuff out before I start putting stuff in your body that's going to like cause like a little like World War I happening, right? So all of those pieces often will impact the outcome. And at the end of the day, I find, like, again, duration. Either people are doing this stuff for way too long, or they're doing it for too short amount of time, or they're missing. I cannot stress enough that rebalance piece is so often part of this conversation.
When you said rebalance and explained what you meant by that, I was over here just doing one of these in my head, because it's so funny you say that. Maybe like a month or so ago, I was like, I need to make sure every client is knowing they need to be chewing their food, like the stupid stuff. It's like, are we really talking about chewing?
Boring.
I learned this in kindergarten. Like, I'm not going to pay you this money to tell me to chew my food. But I'm like, no. So I made a handout of the basically everything you just said, where it's like, you got to chew your food. You can't be eating stress. Like, if you're stressed, take a few deep breaths before you're eating, because those are those daily things are what's throwing someone back. And, you know, for me, it was, I had to learn how to stop working out like crazy. And so I took, I never thought I'd do it, but I took a year off of working out. And really, like, over the last 2 years, my workouts have been bare minimum. And I had to, because my stress response was too high. I was not able to recover my digestion until I started addressing the stress. You know, like, Lara, you're probably the same way. It's like, I know you pile a lot of things on your plate. I don't know how you do all the things you do. So I know, like, you probably have to check yourself sometimes, like, okay, am I doing too much? Like, that's me. I had to check myself. I had to start.
We're not out here saying the stuff because we're like, we've got it like locked in. No. We learned this the hard way.
We learned the hard way. We learned the hard way. Yeah, for sure. And so, but it was the biggest blessing. And I every time I'm working with a client, like, I'm remembering what I felt like when I was there. And, you know, and it's still fresh in my, like, I don't think it will ever not be fresh in my mind. And so, you know, I'm very grateful for it. I'm grateful that my body failed on me, because I would not have the desire to learn the depth that I learned, if it wasn't for that experience. But I really love everything you said. I would encourage, you know, everyone, if this is you, if you're needing to, like, apply some of this, you might go back and listen to what Lara just said, because those are some really, really great points you made. I think we hit on most of the questions. Let me just see if
we sort of combined some answers. And
I think we did. I feel like, is there anything, I don't know if you can see the question box, Lara, but is there anything that we skipped over?
Don't see anything. No, I think we did it.
We did it.
Go us. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, this was wonderful. Thank you for going over with me. I mean, hey, if I always tell people, I'm like, if I have time, I'm gonna give it, you know?
Oh, I learned a while ago that I give myself, like, so to your point, like, how do I balance it all? I just started learning that I need to give myself buffers. So one of the things that I do to manage my stress is that I don't put things back to back anymore, right? I limit my schedule in a way that I know I am chatty. I'm going to go over, and I don't want to stop the conversation because I have to go to another meeting, right? Like, I want to actually be here and live in this moment. So I am glad that I didn't double book myself today.
I learned that lesson this year. It took me a little while to get there, but actually today I did not practice that lesson. But I let my clients know up front that I was like, I do have someone right after you today. Like, if I don't, I'll give them a little extra time. But I'll tell them, like, I do have someone right after you today, so I got to go right on time. But they get it, because if I can go over, I will. So thank you. Wonderful. I guess Lauren will probably jump in with the information on the free goodie if she's still here. And thank you, everyone, for all of your questions.
So I am still here. First thing though, I want I want you guys to tell us, where can we find you? Like social media, things like that. Yeah.
Do you want, I think, Lara, do you have your information on your thing? Because you can share your screen so people can see, and then I can do that.
It's not on the thing, but it's not very hard. You can find me at larazakaria.com for my first name, my last name. There's Larazakaria.com. And there's a lot of information there, including a blog and a lot of content there. You can even see a link to a program that I did specifically on thyroid health in collaboration with the Better Nutrition program, which is also part of the download that you'll have access to after this webinar. But essentially, the program really focuses on a lot of these key elements that we talked about. It's a 4-week program. You get coaching and you get to walk through it. So I think that's kind of the fun thing that I got to work on earlier this year. And you can find me on Instagram. I spend too much time. Lindsey will confirm this. I spend too much time on Instagram at Foodie Pharmacist. So that's Foodie Pharmacist with 2 F's, FOODIE, Pharmacist, FARMISCT. Forgot how to spell pharmacist.
Yeah. I actually confirm that because I have spent like 0 time on Instagram over the last, for too long. So I just took my board exam last week. So I have been like so MIA. People are starting to text me like, are you okay? I'm like, yeah, I'm good. I'm studying over here. Okay. But yes, it's funny though, because when I do pop on, like you'll a lot of times pop up on my newsfeed. So the little bit of time I'm there, but that's amazing. I will share my screen here, which I guess it takes it'll take a minute to come up because it goes black for a little bit, but you can either go to my website, which is nutridayfitness.com, or on Instagram, at Lindsey Day Fitness. And now that I've completed the board exams, like I love putting out this educational content. So I do have a lot of educational content on there, but I actually have some good ideas for things that I want to talk a little bit more about and throw out some more educational content. And then for anyone, I do a free 15-minute phone conversation. Honestly, like in that conversation, if I give you one good thing that helps you on your way, awesome. Like that's my way of paying it forward. And then if you wanted to work with me, I probably need to not take on another client for at least another month, if we're being honest. But yes, I will. Like my whole goal with people is to get them to graduate. So like, I like for people to spread their wings and fly. So I don't really want to be, not that I don't want to be working with someone for forever, but like, I think, a good way to do it is like teach the man to fish so that they can go catch their own fish and don't just feed them fish. So I have a couple of clients that are almost ready to spread their wings and fly. So that's how you can find me.
Amazing. And Lindsey, I think your point on that, it's even like when you first start working out with a trainer, they're going to give you the tools and the knowledge on like what's the best form, and then you can move forward and kind of implement all of that on your own. I think that that's very applicable to everything that we're talking about right now. And that was incredible. Wow. I'm not surprised that we went over on time. We cannot thank you two enough. You guys provided us with so much crucial info and tangible tips that I think everyone can implement into their everyday lives. So that was incredible. I know I was over here taking notes, and this recording will be on YouTube as well. So everyone keep an eye out for that. I know a couple of people were already mentioning that in the chat, which makes me really happy. It means that this information is resonating with everyone here, and that's exactly what we want. So really happy about that. And as a reminder, all of our attendees, they're going to receive a follow-up email with a promo code for $25 off your next one-time box with Paleo on the go. And there's also going to be a link to Dr. Zakaria's free thyroid ebook. I know Lindsey mentioned she also has a handout. You guys are just going to have to join us for our next webinar to be able to get that too.
That's great.
And and then we do have some exciting news. So our new summer menu is launching this Sunday, June 23rd. So the promo code expires this Sunday at 11:59 p.m. So you're going to be able to use it to try some of our new items. We cannot wait for you guys to try all the new flavors. They're incredible. I've already tried them. I love them. I think you will too. And other than that, follow us on social media, stay plugged in for all of our upcoming events. And, Lindsey, Laura, thank you again. You guys were amazing. This was incredible.
Thank you, everyone. We'll see you for the next one.
Thanks again
See
for
you
the
guys.
opportunity.
Yeah. All right. Bye, guys. Bye, everyone.
Bye.